You've had some really profound comments about what is going on, and for you right now, what do you think needs to happen in this country?
But both these directions of presenting the problem of self-realization are certainly not frivolous, and certainly require a great deal of self-examination. And this is a great problem which faces us now among young people who are in revolt against all sorts of things that in the lives of their fathers and mothers they feel to be false. They are in revolt against what Buddhists call samsara. Samsara means the wheel of birth and death. But samsara really is the same thing as a squirrel cage, a rat race, where you are working and working and working for you really know not what. A process of gaining money or status or whatever it is, but it's just not enough to revolt. It's not enough to challenge everybody's standards in clothing, in housing, in family arrangements, and so on. Behind and beyond all that, there must be some way of bringing it all to earth, grounding it.
Professor, thanks so much for coming on. I've thought of you since all of this started, and I should say at the outset, you weren't a conservative last I talked to you. I doubt you are now. But you were one of the people who saw this most clearly earliest. So what's your reaction to watching it happen to millions of others?
As I've intimated already, the fascination of young people today is very dangerous. Like every worthwhile enterprise is dangerous. If they weren't doing that, they'd be driving hot rods and perhaps skydiving. Anyway, something dangerous. The young always have to be involved in something dangerous. But this adventure of exploration of the inner world is of peculiar danger simply because it goes into that aspect of our being about which we know least, our own inner life, our minds. Yeah. But it is of the utmost importance that those adventures be accompanied with some kind of discipline. Now, discipline is a dirty word today among young people. When you say discipline, it means, don't do it. And so I substitute for the word discipline the word skill, because there is no pleasure in this world without skill.
You make such a deep point that I want to play night after night.
But I think there's a lot of people who are still not sure about where this goes, and maybe some people focus more on, law breaking and looting, and others focus more on, police actions that are brutal. And yet the vast majority of police and the vast majority of protesters have been, trying to follow the law and peaceful. And how do you get away from the us versus them and this polarization which is stoked by our political leaders? And
if you are brought up
by everything
to believe yourself split, I remember my mother used to say to me when I did naughty things, she said, "Alan, that's not like you." So I had, some conception of what was like me in my better moments, that is to say, in the moments when I remembered what my mother would like me to do. And so that split is implanted in us all. And because of our being split-minded, we are always dithering. Is the choice that I am about to make of the higher self or of the lower self? Is it of the spirit or is it of the flesh? Is the word that I have received of the Lord or is it of the devil? And nobody can decide. Because if you knew how to choose, you wouldn't have to. Supposing I could set myself the ideal of being absolutely loving to everybody, what would that imply in terms of conduct? Well, you can think about that till all is blue, because you could never get to the answer. The problems of life are so subtle that to try to solve them with vague principles, as if those vague principles were specific instructions, is completely impossible.
And you must be very conscious, as you all are very conscious, of the strife, the discord, the gap between generations. And so what I myself regard my function to be a bridge person. I've worked all my life to be a bridge between East and West. And now it's thrown in my lap the job of being a bridge between the young and the old. And so now I'm talking to a relatively older group, and I want to say some very serious things to you about how to handle what is happening among young people.
Please do.
Because the young are interested, deeply and seriously interested, in the transformation of consciousness, in breaking out from the narrow situation of the alienated individual against the world. But in doing this, they are showing the usual excesses and imbalances of things that young people always do. They're not experienced, they're not mature. Therefore, just for the very reason that they're not mature, they have the guts, or the foolhardiness, if you want to call it that, to go out on these expeditions. But it was always so.
So what if I'm wrong? And I think a lot of us don't really think that thought very often, and I think it's a really important, thought to think, like, what if my perspective is actually wrong on this? And being open to that possibility even, I think can lead to interesting places.
So I think this is the most releasing thing that anybody can possibly understand, that your inner feeling is never wrong. That's to say, what you feel, it's never wrong that you feel that way. It may not be a right guide to what you should do. In other words, if you feel that you hate someone intensely, it isn't necessarily the right way of dealing with that feeling to go out and cut his throat. But it is right that you should have the feeling of hating. It doesn't mean to say, let me emphasize this, it doesn't mean that we always are therefore compelled to act upon the basis of what we feel. That is to say, to kill the person we hate. Hatred does not necessarily lead to violence. It is unacknowledged hatred that leads to violence. Honest hatred can be expressed in much simpler ways.
But you, as I repeat, you are rightly and properly concerned as to what will be the outcome. And the only way to make a good job of it is, instead of saying, suppress the whole thing, which never works anyway, is to emphasize the point, all right, you've done this. This is what you've seen. You've had these experiences, but there is a great deal more to it than that.
There was a master walking in the forest with a group of his disciples, and suddenly he picked up a tree branch and said to one of the monks, "What is it?" And the monk hesitated, didn't answer immediately, so the teacher hit him with it. So he turned to another monk and said, "What is it?" And the monk said, "Give it to me so that I can see." And the master tossed him the branch. He caught it and he hit the master with it. And so the master said, "Well, you got out of that dilemma."